presentation. So I'll be, oops, all right. So I'll be taking you through the story map that I've created for the presentation, and the link to the story map is in the, you should be able to see it in the chat. Mitch will put it in there for you. And that way you can kind of move along. If there's something you like from the presentation, feel free to take a copy of it, put it aside, or make use of it somehow. So what I'll be looking at today is some key points to developing global citizens, and this came out of a magazine called Professionally Speaking for Ontario Teachers, and they had some key points there, and there's about a few that we'll look at that are specific to geography and using ArcGIS in the classroom. And then I'll show you, if you haven't seen already, the Canadian Geographic Education's learning framework, some useful tools there about engaging students and how and why it's important to engage students in geography in the classroom. And then I have 2 grade 9 lessons that you will have access to, and some of the resources there, and then an example of a student work there. And similarly for the grade 12s, the world issues class, there will be a couple of lessons outlining the different apps that I've used in the classroom, and have share the story map presentation from the students. And then I'm going to go through, if some of you haven't seen it already, some of the ArcGIS resources that can be found when your board is has a sign-on or access to ArcGIS online. And then there'll be some time for questions, and hopefully some time for you at the end to work through some of the lessons and work on some of the skills in ArcGIS. All right. So before we get started, though, I know that land acknowledgement was introduced at the beginning, but I'd like to just share a little short one here for where I'm coming from in Toronto. So as a settler and treaty member, I acknowledge that I am hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas, of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. I also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nation and Métis Inuits. And this is land acknowledgement that I was received from our geography coach, actually, from the TDSB, so she allowed me to borrow that. Okay, so I am doing this ArcGIS online for Esri. And if you would like, they would like to get some feedback from you who is participating. So there's a QR code. You can just take a picture, or if you want, there's a link here that if you're following along, you can click on that link and complete the survey of who's participating. If you have questions, they'll get back to you for sure. Okay, so we're going to move on to helping develop students become global citizens. These are the 10 points that came from Professionally Speaking. Like I mentioned earlier, it's a Ontario publication for Ontario teachers. Some of the key points I highlighted here in blue are very specific to geography and easy to implement in the classroom. Discuss current events, use maps, globes as educational tools, assign projects with international focus, and share global statistics and infographics. So these key points are a big part of the 4 evaluations that I will be sharing with you. And ArcGIS Online is a useful tool, very useful tool in helping address those 4 key points. Throughout the lessons and activities as well, I've incorporated the concepts of thinking, spatial significance, patterns, trends, geographic perspective, and interrelationships. And these come from the geographic framework, and they are very useful tools as well for helping engage students and leading them to be global citizens. This link here will take you to the learning framework page. And the good thing about CanGeoEd work and resources is that it is bilingual, so it's great for French immersion, French ESL, French learners, it's as well as English, of course. The two key ones that we'll be looking at, really addressing in these lessons are the last two. Apply problem solving to geographic issues for common good, and then apply geospatial skills in order to participate in demographic process. So these are the key areas where ArcGIS Online can be very useful. Okay, so we can get into some of the activities right now, actually. And the first one here is a grade 9 activity looking at natural disasters. So I have links to the worksheet here, and then I'll be sharing, going through the story map that the students created. What you'll probably find is that the student story maps are a lot nicer than the story map I have created. I am not a expert with story maps. I do my best to bring in the tools and expose the opportunities to the students so they can work on it. And they often take the lead and come back and show me a few little things here and there, how to improve mine. But I like to stick with the basics because it gets the job done. So with the first one here with natural disasters, the point of this one is for the students to become familiar with a variety of different natural disasters in Canada, and then become a little bit expert in at least one of them and develop an action plan of what citizens or communities could do in the event of a natural disaster. So we use the geographic inquiry process along the way. Formulate a question, gather organized data, interpret data, come up with an evaluate or come to a conclusion, and then communicate. So I really encourage my students to create a story map whenever they're communicating their results. So here's what the students would be doing. They'd be picking one natural disaster from each of the different types of natural disasters, and then they will come up with an understanding, and then they'll pick the one that they're most interested in to create their communication piece that explains their action plan. So here's the graphic organizers for the students, and we're looking at using the geographic definition of what is where, why there, and why care through it, as well as the concepts of thinking spatial significance, patterns, and trends and interrelationships, just to help the students organize their thoughts and help them develop some potential solutions. So they do this for one type of natural disaster for each of the different categories. And when they have finished, they pick the one they would like to do. So here's where I'll ask them to write down the specific natural disaster that they're working toward. Then we have some inquiry type questions that they can use to guide their research and their information. And then the fourth section, looking at spatial significance. So this is where they're going to map their natural disaster using ArcGIS Online. And to help the students out, I have a few different, a few videos that I've created to help them add layers if they forget how to add some of the layers into their ArcGIS map. Again, a little video here that you'd have access to if you wish, creating a buffer. So that's another skills. So if, for example, students were doing earthquakes, they may want to create a buffer around the epicenters just to determine the severity of the earthquake and what might need to happen happen with regards to their emergency response. And then there's some other data here from ArcGIS Online that they can copy paste into their search in ArcGIS Online, and then they can display it there. And then I give my students a variety of different opportunities of how to share their work, but this is what I really encourage them to do story maps, because any activity that we're doing in class, there's a location piece to it. We're always mapping it out. And then to help the students along, there's a peer evaluation. and then the rubric that goes along with it. So here's an example of the finished work from one of my students, and I will say she was one of the better students. Her story map, I thought, was very well researched, well put together, organized, and she communicated her findings very well. So here's her introduction, and this is just another way of displaying their work. So they would have created a spatial journal first to locate where their natural disaster was taking place. And then here they'd be able to embed the map. There's an icon they can click, add map, and they can go to the map they saved. And it is an interactive map. It talks about I think this one was wildfires, so there's some wildfire information. Came from a layer from Esri ArcGIS Online already, and that was very useful. And then the students would look at it, analyze it for patterns that we may see which parts of Canada have more wildfires, and then get into the why. And this is going to be very interesting this year if the data gets updated for the most recent wildfires to see what happens with some of their solutions, or see if the wildfires, current ones, are fitting into this pattern that we have. So then there's her discussion about the wildfires, how likely will it be to occur again, and as we know, it does happen often, some causes of wildfires. Then we're looking at the interrelationships. How might it impact nature, the economy, communities? And then she incorporated a geographic perspective when developing her action plan. And then looking at what some NGOs or governments would be responsible for doing in the event of a natural disaster. And this is the part I like here, where she actually brings us through to two events that have happened and goes into a bit more discussion about some specific examples, like the Fort McMurray fire 2016, and then the Battleship Mountain fire in BC. So it's this image unfortunately didn't save, but there's an example of the natural disasters activity with the lessons. Another one that we did toward the end with the grade 9s was livable communities, and this one I like because we did a little bit of crowdsourcing with the students. So I teach at York Mills Collegiate in the Toronto District School Boards, located close to the Don Valley Parkway and 401, for anybody who might be a little familiar with Toronto. So again, we're using the geographic inquiry here. They come up with an inquiry question as a group. How are we going to make Toronto more sustainable, more livable? And one of the things that I had them do with regards to starting off with gathering their data was looking at survey 1, 2, 3 and creating a survey. So I created this survey with the students, so we would collaborate to come up with key elements to help make a city or make York Mills more sustainable. So here's an example of the survey that we ended up with. And it was a pretty straightforward survey. So we had the different characteristics that we thought was important in making a community more livable, and as a drop down. So individuals, as they walked around the community, they could select one from this list every time they thought here is something that they noticed. Then the phone would automatically open up and put the point in their maps. They just had to submit it. They were asked to take a picture just to show the evidence, and then a very brief explanation of what of the characteristic itself, if it was good example or if it's something that needed to be fixed in the future, and then they submitted it. So what the results gave us for this survey with my grade 9s, I was able to share it with them. And this is one thing I like a lot. about survey 1, 2, 3. It already, once you get the points set up, students are able to create a map right away, which is, for me, which is brilliant. So the students have their, as soon as my network speeds up, there we go. They have the data here, and they can analyze the data, they can collaborate, that's sharing, so they'll analyze the data, but if they like it and they're going to use it, they go open in Map Viewer. And I'm going to apologize right now because I use Map Viewer Classic. I do, for the Esri people out there listening, I do strongly encourage my grade 9s, all my students, to use the updated version, because it is better, but I'm still not used to it. So I go into the Map Viewer, the classic one. I'm a little bit more familiar with this one here, and then we can see that there's an outlier from one location, but we won't go into that. When we zoom into our community where the students were, and some of them made it downtown, which was interesting. They have the different places here, and then what they can do, they can filter out to see what they might be most interested. So what is the characteristics? So if they want to look at walkability, transportation, so maybe walkability, they can apply the filter, and now we're only looking at walkability issues. And here's where they get to play around with the style of it. They can change the color, change the symbol, but just to show you what information is collected, when we click on one of the places, here's a brief explanation on walkability, and oops, there's the picture here that we can see what they took, and this was a crosswalk, and they're commenting this is not a very clear crosswalk, and it needs to be updated if we want to make it a safe crossing space for individuals. Again, this is using the old version of ArcGIS Online. The newer version, the image pops up, and maybe this year I will start training myself to use the newer version. So, oops, let's, okay, so if we go back to the worksheet where they were, so here's some data that's available in ArcGIS Online, so the students could just copy these terms, put it in the search engine, and they would pop up. For other communities around the country, there are a lot of open source data points that you can get access to get your own local data, or you just use the data that your students create. And then they would map out, they would do their story map, and a few key things that they would incorporate into basically how Toronto, or how our community in Toronto, could be more sustainable, more livable. Some things to look at. There's some tools on some helpful hints for 9 ways to make your community more sustainable. I have an infographic just to keep track of their resources, but to be honest, most of my students were just going to the internet, so using the type of media, most of it was just a web address, and making sure that they were reputable web addresses. Again, we had a little peer review, and then a rubric again for their, so they have an idea of what their work would earn. So here's an example of the final works that one of my students did. And they looked at Denmark here. Somebody who knows Toronto might say that doesn't look like Toronto, but we looked at, this student looked at Denmark to compare, because I guess similar climate, it's cold, they get snow, it's on the water, and see what they could do. And one of the interesting things here, 90% of people own a bike and ride their bikes around the city, even in winter when it's cold. Maybe we could do that here in Toronto to be a bit more sustainable. And then she was able to incorporate some of her research into her story map. And she this is a table or a chart, excuse me, that came from survey 123, so she could show her evidence and the work that she did to collect the data. And then on the side, here's just a map that came from her results. So if we move in, we see dots. No, we're not seeing any of her dots there, but she did put in some pathways. So you can minimize that. Oh, here come the dots here. So there are some things that she put in there. Some of the data that she found. And it's interactive, so we can see what's happening at the different places that she incorporated into her map. Oops, let's refresh something like that. All right. And she then she's able to manipulate her map by adding in where she would want to put in more bike lanes, crosswalks, anything to make it a little safer for cyclists in this instance. And again, it's her story map is incorporated the spatial journal that she created. And again, her survey 123 results using the interrelationships, the concepts of geographic thinking, and coming up with a final solution for her work. So that's some examples from grade 9, my grade 9 students. If you want to try some of those lessons just to explore, that's wonderful. You can do it now or later. I'm going to show some grade 12 activities. So here is one where students were looking at the Kashmir conflict and coming up, analyzing some of the information on the countries associated with the conflict, looking at the religion of the region, the ethnicity of the region, and then trying to come up with a potential solution to this ongoing conflict. And again, it's a sort of problem-based learning. Given the scenario, they're going to have to develop some sort of solution working for the United Nations, looking at some statistics to back up their solution, and also understanding the geography of the region, how that might impact the potential solution. Some of the key things, so they were going to create a spatial journal, complete a geopolitical organizer, and make sure they add graphs charts of the ethnicities and the religions of the area, if that had an impact on what their solution might be. And then their communication piece, I really encouraged also, like, was the story map. So for this one, they mapped out some key points using ArcGIS Online, or some students, I don't want to say this so much, earlier on, they might have just done it on a map. But now I'm really encouraging using ArcGIS Online because, to be blunt, it is a lot easier to do. And if you make a little mistake, it's easier to fix than if they did it with pen and paper. Here's an example of the geopolitical organizer. So they would write down the stakeholders, what is their position on the issue. And then we look specifically about Kashmir and so its population, some key things about its geography, and some economic information. I mean, you could expand this some more, but I just kept it kind of a little bit focused for the students. Then we looked at some of the 3 key players that our group thought was important to focus at. And again, this may change if other people look at the region and come up with some other key players that should be involved in that, and depending on how much time. So we looked at the viewpoint. The students then had to record some fact and opinion and try to keep them separate. And their potential solution would have been based on more fact as opposed to opinion. And then coming up with, they would evaluate the viewpoints of the particular stakeholders and then come up with a solution for themselves. So they were supplied with some statistical information about some of the key players in the region. And then some added some little videos here to support, tried to give a balance of different perspectives. And students were also encouraged to do their own research and get their own variety of information. And here was the hardline master that I gave the students, but nobody uses that anymore, so I might be able to remove that. And then we had the rubric for the students, so that they have an understanding of how well they'd be doing. And then the example of this student's work, again, story maps. It's a fun and easy way once the students get used to it and coming up with their solution. So they create a spatial journal again, and they were able to take that spatial journal and drop it right away into their story map. If you're not familiar with story map, there is a little icon, and when you click on the icon and it asks you, it prompts you, what would you like to put in this place? A picture, a text, a map, and so on. So I want to say it's straightforward with a little bit of experience, but it is very user friendly. So here's the basic map that they put in some information. We can see some of the key players, and then when we just click on one of the countries, so there's a bit of information, and here they created a table with their statistics that was supplied to them. So some of the data is a little dated. I'm going to have to get some more updated information on the religion and ethnicity. And then later on, they would display their work with the pie charts that you can create in ArcGIS Online, as well as in Survey 123. So if they create their table in Survey 123, it's very easy to create a pie chart in there. And here are some of the pie charts that they use to help come up with a potential solution. They looked at the geography, the spatial significance, and how that might impact, looked at the different stakeholders and their geographic perspective. And ultimately, the student came up with their own proposal. And then there's some other resources that they looked at. Okay, and then the last one of the ones that I like to do with my grade 12s is the chocolate bar one. So this activity, we used ArcGIS Online. We used Survey 123 so that we could crowdsource and help speed up some of the research. So where ingredients were grown in which countries, and see some of the similarities. So this lesson, and then again, we use StoryMap to communicate the results. So this lesson, we're looking at, again, child labor, the industry, about chocolate, and how we can make it more friendly, and how maybe come up with a solution for some companies to do a little bit better. And then, so there's some key terms that we looked at. I had them work in groups of 4, and they could select, I gave them a list of chocolates that they could select from. And then they'd use ArcGIS Online to look at the gross domestic product of some of the countries involved in the chocolate ingredient making, or exporting, harvesting, and then the countries that made the chocolate. And I did this one in Survey 123. And when we look here, this was the survey that the students had created. So they would name the ingredient that was used, find out which country was exporting it, and then they would be able to crowdsource this data and then share all of this information. So it actually sped up the research, so that it wasn't one person or one group researching everything. They could share the labor, and here's the results that the students were able to come up with. Let's see, so This is the results page. They had the country, and if they go to data, when they clicked on data, then again, they can open it up in their own map viewer. And then they can create their own spatial journal of the data. So my network's slowing down a little bit. Let's see. You might just have to take my word for it, that it did populate it quite nicely. Let's see what we have. Oh, there's some of the results that we had. And again, each one was a different ingredient, so students can filter out. And in this case, they'd be using the filter here. They could filter out which ingredient they wanted to examine, and then use that and drop that into their own story map and come up with their solution. So we did have a few videos that supported the chocolate industry, or well, mentioned child labor or slavery in the chocolate industry. Didn't really support the chocolate manufacturers so well. And some key guiding questions, inquiry questions that the students would focus on and incorporate into their final work as well. Again, encouraging the students to use the geographic definition, what's, where, why, there, and why care, to help come up with a potential solution. And then again, a rubric to support their learning. And what the final work ended up being, the story map. And this is a map I'm going to have to try to incorporate into some of my story maps that I'm going to use this year for my classes. So this person did Kit Kat, and I like how this person has, she created her map of key places where certain ingredients were coming from. And as we scroll through the left-hand side, the map will move to the ingredient with a little bit of a discussion. She has the GDP and so on, so we can look at some interrelationships going on, geographic perspective. And then I really like how it transitions around the map to the different ingredients and where they can be found. And that'll take a little bit more practice for me. I was able to do it in the older story map, but with this newer version, which isn't all that new, I'm just a little slow to adapt, that's all. And again, some facts about what's happening, looking at spatial significance. And it looks like she stopped with the moving, but I can move it around, or the points. Oh, there's no 0.5 there. Well, then 0.6, there it goes. So who's making all the profit? And then potentially coming up with a potential solution, or how to make it a little bit better for the workers in particular. And she's discussed some imbalances, obstacles to change, and here's where she becomes a global citizen by coming up with a potential solution, speaking out, making suggestions on what consumers can do, because there are a few chocolate bar companies that do their very best to use fair trade cocoa as much as possible. And then her bibliography. So those were the examples of some student work. Okay. Oops. Okay. Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, thanks. It's shared. Great. So we don't need to look at that. All right. Some key resources. So what we see here is the Toronto District School Board. This is my homepage when I sign into ArcGIS online. And some of the key tools that I use often: ArcGIS Online, Survey 123, and Story Map. If you're having a hard time, or if you're just getting started and you're not sure where to go with Survey 123, or with ArcGIS Online, excuse me, when you go to the K-12 education resource, this is a link that is found on the homepage. So I actually, if I go back to my homepage here, so this is what it looks like when I log into ArcGIS Online. At the bottom, there's the resource. So when I click on that, this resource builder pops up, and this tool is so very useful. You can select by subject, and in Ontario, we are specific to geography and history. They're set apart, and even in history, they can use ArcGIS Online, which is brilliant. In many other provinces in Canada, it's just social studies. But you can use it for civics, science, and this application, this tool is useful in so many different subject areas. And getting started, you as a teacher, if you're just getting started, there's videos to help you out. There's a few tutorials, there's lessons that you can go through and give your kids. And one activity that I strongly encourage if you're an educator to use is the 6x6. So in here, if we just type in 6x6, what it does, it gives you 6 lessons, activities that you can use that is specific to the different provinces. And I'll go to Ontario, and you can download it. I'll do it quickly. And this is it's a very useful tool in getting students started who have never used it before. What I often do with my students, first time in, I show them how to access ArcGIS Online, and then I just have them explore. Once they play around with it, there's a lot of learning that goes on as they're playing around with the software. And then I'll take them through here then, because there's some key skills that students will learn, like using the pan tool if they haven't used it, zooming in, zooming out, using the search. So they get to play around. It's a guided play around with the software, and then they can get used to some of the key tools used in ArcGIS Online that they'd be using quite often in many of their evaluations. And then they're exploring some content that's available, pre-made maps, looking at some census data. So there are some changes, like the census 2016 data is not there anymore for Ontario, but we can get the most up to date. Sometimes I'll just do a quick search, see what it is, and then I'll prompt the students, instead of looking at 2016, have them go look at 2020, for example, or 2021, and then add that information in. There's a few things here that are pre-made, things that they get to explore, some story maps that they can have a look at. And then the final one, which is actually one that I like and a lot of my students do like, they create an earthquake map. So there's up-to-date data, live data that they can access when they look at world volcanoes, which is right down here. And I forget the website where they go to. Anyway, oh, here it is, earthquakes from the USGS website, and they can get this, start learning how to take a CSV file and bring that over into their spatial journal. So this is a very useful activity. They say 6x6, like each activity is supposed to take about 6 minutes. For me, in practice, this one takes a little bit longer. Step 6 takes my students, it's taken a period. For some of my students, other students will have it done in about 6 minutes. So as a teacher, you're going to have to balance that out a little bit. So that's a very, very useful tool. The education resource, anytime if you're having a hard time coming up with an idea what to do, there's lessons there. Great, print them off or give them access in your whatever media your board is using. It's a wonderful wonderful tool. One resource that I started off with a long time ago, and I think it's been updated and they're still available. I used to use this Mapping Our World when it was on CDs for my desktop that I use, ArcGIS desktop that I used about 20 years ago. But this link, it takes you to resource, and this resource is very useful. It has lessons, activities. So if we click on it, oops. So here's what some of the things that are part of it. But if you just click on mapping our, oops, let's go to content, see if that, okay, so this is the different mapping our world lessons and activities that you can get access to. So they have student work with answer sheets. There's all the directions, some support material for students, and teacher materials. In the hard copy, they actually told you what some of these modules were. I can't remember what they are, but if you click on them, the title should, sorry, okay, I'm not too sure, so I'm going to download this one. Oops. Let's see what it's about. If my network crashes here, I apologize because I'm doing this from home. Okay, so it's working, but oops, here we go. So this is basic geographic inquiry method. Using some of the tools, they give you a nice estimated time, some key GIS tools that you're using, geographic standards, all sorts of information to help you explain, set it up, what you're going to be doing with your students. I mean, this might even work very well if you're having a teacher appraisal, which we have to do in Ontario every couple of years. You can share this with your administration. And then there's some guidelines of what you're going to be seeing throughout. So that's from the teacher's perspective. What I did share here are some of the ones that, and I can't remember the numbers, I apologize for that, what module they're part of, but there was one, The Earth Moves, which was very useful in Ontario. It's called Forces of Nature. Then the environmental resource management course, there's Life on the Edge, which was an activity looking at the different types of life in some of the more precarious parts of the globe, like near volcanoes, on coastal lines, near fault lines and things like this. So that was really good and useful in that course. And then the World Issues class, Growing Pains. So this one dealt with population increase and so on, and mapping that out. So that was a very useful tool I found. Okay. So how are we doing for time? Not so bad. Okay, we're almost done. And the last thing, in Ontario, we have what's called Skills Ontario, which is the provincial version of Skills Canada, which deals with mainly the trades and hands-on type learning experiences like auto mechanics, wood shop, and so on, that students are engaged in the schools. But there's only a few provinces that have geography where they use ArcGIS, and in Ontario, we have ArcGIS Skills Canada competition. And to be honest, I have my students compete in the TDSB competition, and just most of the time it's grade 9s, because grade 12s seem to be too busy getting ready for university, but they participate, that we spend afternoons learning and just doing our best. And a few times they've done pretty well at Skills Ontario, even though it's from grade 9 to grade 12. But next year, I hope I'll have my grade 9s that started 2 years ago. They competed in when they're in grade 10, and now they're moving into grade 11. So it's a chance for students to show off what they have learn from what other people are doing around the province, and in some cases, it's wonderful put down on their resume going off to university. And there's a few different activities that they do at problem-based learning. I wonder if here's a 2021 question. I'll just show you what it looks like. It's prompts. There's no instruction on how to do the skill, even though it is like an open book quiz. But it's a wonderful opportunity for the students. And so here this one there, Burlington, a city near Toronto, was coming up with a new transit route. So they come up with the criteria, and they talk about their the skills that the students need to use. So a query or filter they have to do. They have to join two tables. They have to symbolize the data. They have to use proximity. So that's like creating a buffer, so on and so forth. So these are the different things that each team would have to display that they have done. And some other things that they have to deliver. So create 5 maps, and they're going to come up with their solution. Here's the data that they would have had access to, and then the rubric for them. So this is a nice activity you could give as an evaluation almost, if you would like. Okay. And yeah, so my contacts at Esri Canada are Angela Alexander, who's been very helpful in supporting me with developing Skills Canada, Skills Ontario questions for my students in the TDSB, and Jean Tong, who I've worked with and has supported me in my finding data that I can bring into my classroom and so on. So if you have any questions about ArcGIS Online, those two are key for me in Ontario, but I know they go around the country, and they are so helpful in supporting teachers delivering materials in the classroom. And then if you have any other questions or lesson you want to talk about some lessons, you can give me an email if you like. Okay, and that brings this session to an end. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. But what I do strongly encourage you to do is explore some of these resources and actually try some of them yourselves. Okay, so I'm going, if it's okay, Mitchell, do I stop sharing my screen and see if there are chats? What would you suggest with the 10 minutes remaining?
Yeah, for sure. We can just turn it to the chat, and if anyone has any questions or anything that they wanted to chat about for the last 10 minutes or so,
Okay,
that's great.
so I'm just going to stop sharing. Here we go. Okay, no worries. Thank you for participating and being here. It was great to share. And I hope if you're moving along with your own lessons and you want to share them back with me or some ideas, that would be great. I have no problem, and I actually like the collaboration. And so the lessons that I've shared, if you have any issues accessing them, they're in my Google Drive with the TDSB. If I haven't made them public to everybody, I can do that also. Or if there's any other resource any link that's not working, please send me an email and I'll fix it as fast as I can.
Well, I don't see any questions coming in, so if you maybe wanted to just maybe wait a minute or something, or if you wanted to head out, and that's okay too. So
yeah, well, to be honest, I might be heading out because I have to. My boy, unfortunately, I think he may have an appendicitis. My wife just went to the doctor. Oh, wait. Oh, now I'm just getting the text message. They're just waiting for the doctor now. So,
okay, well, you can for sure go for it. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much, everybody. And if you have any ideas for lessons and things like that, and you want to share stuff, please